Creator and founder of Star Citizen, Chris Roberts, reflects on slow development, discusses upcoming full persistence tech, cancels Citizencon, expands the development team, and talks about testing server meshing in 2022. Maybe. Oh, and there's a bar citizen somewhere in there too. This and more in today's video. So don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon if you think I deserve it by the end and you want to see more. So if you guys have been following my channel for a while, you'll know that I don't usually post the news here. But every so often, there's a big chunk of news that I just can't ignore, and this is one of those. Chris Roberts, the founder of Star Citizen, has finally posted his letter from the chairman for the first time in like 2 years. And so there's a lot of juicy information in there that we gotta get through, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to be as concise as possible and go through each part of the letter so you guys can be brought up to speed. I'll focus on the things that I feel are really important, so if I miss anything that you really wanna hear about, definitely read it yourself. I'll post a link down below if you've got time. So the letter kicks off with a year in review where Chris reflects on how COVID-19 had a big effect on CIG's ability to get patches out for Star Citizen in a timely fashion. And you'll know that if you've been following the project that's really been the case. A lot of these patches have been really late, going into super long PTU cycles and leaving a lot of big bugs unresolved. Chris then goes on to say that he's relieved that they're finally returning to the studio in Manchester, Frankfurt, Austin, and Los Angeles, where they can start to have those great spontaneous collaborations that they used to be able to have in the past, where you could walk over to somebody's desk and ask them a question, or have a conversation overheard where somebody has a great idea or a great solution that you didn't think of. And as somebody who works in the creative industry designing architecture, I can tell you that this is 100% true. Working in person does inspire more creative thought and helps you come up with solutions that you just could not have come up with on your own. So I'm excited to see what they are able to do getting back into an office together. He goes on to say that 2021, despite the setbacks, was still a really good year as they delivered their first dynamic event, Xenothreat, and introduced stuff like the Bengal and the Javelin Tour, which you guys have probably already seen on my channel. They also introduced big features like medical gameplay, looting, bombing, personal inventory features, and introduced stability improvements that reduced 30Ks by a big factor, and also added in 30K recovery so that if the server goes down, you're able to get your ship and whatever you were shipping back. That was a big win for a lot of us. He then reveals that this has been the best year for Star Citizen ever, which I think we can all see from the amount of people coming in and from the videos that we keep seeing from big YouTubers. He explains that the rate this year doubled for new users. It's up 50%, and that Star Citizen is on track to pass 500 million in funding gross total this year, with over 1 million unique logons in 2022 and 4 million accounts since the creation of Star Citizen. Chris attributes this success to the fact that Star Citizen has a combination of scale and detail that you just can't get anywhere else. That ability for you to go seamlessly in first person onto a super detailed ship, then up into space to fight pirates or to go visit moons is a kind of experience that you can't get anywhere else right now. And I have to 100% agree with him on this. But while he doesn't say it in this particular paragraph, he does talk about later how new players and veterans are returning to play the new events that they're having. And I think that's actually a big factor in why people are sticking around, because there's something to stick around for. And then finally, in the last half of this first section of his letter, he addresses some of the criticism about Star Citizen's timelines and schedules that they've repeatedly missed. And if you are somebody who follows Star Citizen's development, you've likely heard about this before. Now, he explains that a lot of this comes down to the fact that the original pitch for Star Citizen back with this original Kickstarter was for a much more limited game experience, something more akin to Freelancer, where you would fly down on rails to a planet's surface, where you would be limited to just a landing zone with a few flip screens to interact with the occupants of that area. This is a far cry from what they're creating today. Today, Star Citizen is much, much more. It's a space sim, a dogfighting sim, a first-person shooter, a trading game, a resource collecting game, a resource management game, an adventure game, a survival game, a social game. It's got a little bit of everything, and that's what's propelled it to such incredible success, both in funding and interest today. Chris explains that a lot of what we love about Star Citizen is what's taking so much time, and I can understand that, and that's why I'm here for the long run. Next up, well, it's Towards the end of the letter, I'm going to first talk about Citizencon. So it's been canceled this year, and Chris explains this is on account of the fact that COVID isn't really 100% gone yet. There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding whether or not they could host it in person in LA if restrictions return. And so instead of risking it and spending a ton of time preparing a keynote presentation and switching developers over to creating this keynote, they're going to do a virtual one again this year with no keynote presentation. And I'm okay with this because they really do need to get Squadron 42 out, and I do want to see server meshing this year, and if this helps them do that, I am 100% on board. Let's get this done, guys. I'm excited. The virtual CitizenCon will feature some bar citizens and some development panels, so if you guys are interested in that, definitely check out the letter. There are more details there. Also, in relation to getting stuff done faster, Chris also talks about how today they're at 780 staff members worldwide, with 130 partners at Turbulent and Montreal who aren't technically part of CIG, but are part of the family. The new offices that they're building right now in Manchester and in Frankfurt are going to allow them to grow up to 840 this year, which is going to be a big help for Squadron 42 and Star Citizen. So I'm excited to see what they're able to pull off because we're already starting to see the benefits of big additions to the development team, such as the one from Montreal, who've helped put together a lot of the recs and the events that we're starting to experience today. They also shared a bunch of really cool renderings of what their new studios are going to look like, which, by the way, are amazing. I would love to work here, and if you guys are looking for a development job because you're in the industry, be sure to check out the recruitment site because they are looking for talented developers worldwide. Alright, I've saved the best for last, the reason why you clicked on this video most likely. The road to 4.0 and Pyro, the biggest patch since 3.0, and Chris says as much. This is similar to the jump from 2.6.3 to 3.0 with its 8-month development time. He now sees us on a similar path to the road to 4.0 with its massive leap forward, because it's not just about server meshing, but what the technology unlocks for CIG to be able to do. We're talking massive amounts of players, big ship battles, the ability to have more star systems, more NPCs flying around the universe, a better tick rate and refresh rate for the servers so we have really responsive AI, just tons and tons of stuff. The ability to have, for example, player housing. All of these things are really locked behind the ability for them to be able to scale the resources of a server to handle the additional load of entities and saved items. To get there though, he describes one more big step before server meshing, and that's persistent entity streaming, or PES, which is the foundational tech that will be required to create server meshing. PES is the hardest part of the work that they need to do for server meshing and has required the greatest amount of effort on the part of the engineers. Now, the importance of PES is that it's responsible for recording the state of every single dynamic object in the game, irrelevant of whether or not it's owned or held by a player. This will allow the game to record and understand where objects are left or placed, regardless of whether or not a player is connected to the server or if the server goes down. And in this part of the letter, he gives us a timeline which includes something you may remember called iCache. He explains that iCache was in fact binned because they realized that that technology that they originally planned to use would not be able to keep up with the demand that they needed for creating the universe that they want with the amount of detail that they have. And so they've decided to switch over to something called the entity graph. And this is going to enable them to have a much better performing way to record this information quickly and keep the performance of servers as high as possible. He then goes into greater detail explaining how all of it works, and I'm going to try to be as concise as possible here. Basically, there's something called the replication layer, and this is a server network that's responsible for communicating between the entity graph, which is this thing that records the persistence of the universe and our account information, and the simulation bit, which is the part that we actually experience the game on. That's where we, fly our ships and see AI. The idea behind this is that the replication layer can be separate from the simulation and doesn't have to rely on the simulation's speed, and so its refresh rate can be set at a set amount independent from that sim. This allows for a much more responsive experience for when you drop an object or you see an object that was left somewhere. And because it's separate from the simulation, it can be scaled through many worker nodes working on the same instance, allowing it to scale with the amount of players in a given area or the amount of entities that need to be recorded in a given area. Now that you understand how these things work, you can understand that PES, or the Persistent Entity Streaming Service, needs this stuff for it to be able to work. He explains that this was one of the biggest technical hurdles for the engineers to pull off. And you'll notice that I'm saying this as past tense. And that's because, my friends, after 16 months of extremely hard work by 18 engineers, 3 dedicated QA members, and 4 producers spread between CIG and Turbulent, the team was able to successfully demonstrate persistent entity streaming with the replication layer and with the entity graph last week in an internal universe update. Here's a quote directly from the letter. Paul Reindel, our director of engineering for online tech, spun up a server, populated the entity graph to its initial state along with the replication layer, which is essentially an in-memory cache for the universe state backend database that exists in the cloud to help make sure read-writes to the database do not bottleneck the servers and clients, something I explained earlier, then connected a client, placed down a series of small objects like cans on the surface of Aberdeen, along with an 890 jump and an anvil arrow, and then he killed the server and the client. The server was then restarted, and we did not populate the entity graph, as it had been previously seeded in the initial startup, and then connected a client, warped to Aberdeen, and everything was there as he placed it. This was a huge milestone, as the state of the universe was recorded to the backend database, and then when he restarted the server, it just connected to the replication layer, which had initialized itself from the database, the entity graph, and continued with the universe at the state he left it. Chris then explains that this is a really big moment for them because it's going to allow them in the coming years to create an experience in gaming that most online games can only dream of. A universe that you can escape to, that's affected by other players' actions, with the state being dynamic, dependent on player action and NPC action. With this in place, server meshing then becomes possible, as the replication layer and entity graph is the universe state that the clients and servers need for the read-write of the universe. So now that we know that persistence is on the cusp of being released to us, when can we expect to see it so that we can test it for ourselves? Well, there's a little bit of a catch here. 2022 is going to be a little bit different than previous years. Chris explains that 3.18 will require a lot longer in Evocati and PTU than patches before it. And this is something I can completely understand. He explained there's going to be a lot of edge cases and issues that they're going to encounter when they scale this technology to thousands of players. And so we're likely to see a release to live of 3.18, and that's the patch with salvage and the cargo refactor, in late Q3 this year, in place of where 3.19 would have been. He believes that the test cycle could be as long as 3 months for the PTU, and I can understand this given that people are probably going to stress it to its limits. Thankfully, they have some tech in place to try to combat the issues they predict they'll see, with something called a density manager, which is going to clean up the objects people are going to inevitably leave around, but we'll just have to see how it plays out. Now keep in mind that because it's going to be in PTU for so long, that we're still likely to see a 3.18 PTU release sometime around when it was originally meant to go live. And so we will still have it in our hands, but we won't be able to play in the persistent universe with our persistent account. Personally, I'm okay with this because they really need to nail this technology before it goes to live. It's really going to affect the way we play the game in a big way, and if it has really big bugs, everyone's going to go into panic mode. Following that, he explains that salvage and the cargo system refactor, which are really big features for this year, are actually designed around this new persistent entity streaming. He says that they are directly reliant on things like wrecks being left behind so that we can salvage them, which will arrive with 3.18. So it is a little bit of a confirmation here that we will have wrecks left behind from exploded ships. And I gotta say, I'm really happy to hear this because I was a little bit worried given the stuff that they've shown us that it was just going to be mining, but instead of rocks spawning randomly, we have wrecks spawning randomly. It's effectively then the same loop with a little bit of a different look. He then goes on to surprise us with the fact that Gen 12 is going to be mostly done and in 3.18, which will mean great performance improvements across the board for everybody, as it has multi-threaded support and is just a more efficient engine than what we have right now. And it's also something that can work with modern APIs like Vulkan, which will even increase the performance further. But now, it's time to talk about the big one, the test for server meshing. Now, the first implementation target is actually going to be static server meshing, where a server is given a defined area to simulate. As soon as it's stable, they will move on to dynamic server meshing, which will allow them to scale the servers depending on load. And this is what's going to allow them to really bring the performance up and to allow a lot more players in a given area. So we're still going to have to see how many players are added in with static server meshing. Maybe at the very least it will increase performance, well, there aren't too many people in a given area. Now this release of server meshing will come together with Pyro and will add a huge amount of new gameplay, polish, and will get them closer to what Chris directly references as beta, which is really impressive because this might be one of the first times I've actually heard him talk about beta for Star Citizen ever. But when, you might be screaming at your screen at this point, when will you be able to test it? When is it going to be in live? Well, the timeline is that they want to shoot for it to be in the test servers at the end of this year. But it's going to start with Evo Kadi, and that's if things go well with the persistent entity streaming service that they're testing in 3.18. So if that doesn't go well, it'll likely get pushed to next year. But if everything goes perfect, then it might go to PTU, the public test universe, so we can have it in our hands before the holidays. But again, all of this depends on how well things go. Whatever happens though, they're still shooting for a Q1 2023 release to the live environment for server meshing. But given that this is a very complex technology, don't be surprised if this gets pushed back. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know that I've been talking about server meshing being pushed back to next year for a while now, so you shouldn't be that surprised that that is in fact the case. Chris finishes off this letter thanking the studios, thanking us as backers for supporting him in the project. And I gotta say, Chris, thank you for having such an amazing vision. And I'm glad we're here today seeing that vision start to become reality. I think that this letter is one of the best letters I've ever seen by Chris Roberts. I am so excited for all the things he's talked about in here, and I'm very happy that he was so candid with us and so realistic about these timelines. I fully suspected that we would have a very long testing cycle if we did any testing this year with persistence or server meshing, and I'm glad to see that they're thinking about how long this might take and planning around it. I'm not really that upset that they're pushing stuff back when it comes to something as important as persistence. If this goes well, the universe becomes possible. This, guys, is really the precipice. This is the edge. This is the cliff. This is the next step. I cannot really express fully here how important these technologies are for Star Citizen to become truly and undisputedly the best space game ever. However, I want to caution you guys against setting that hype train to full throttle, because although this tech is important and is possibly going to be coming online this year with persistence and server meshing, the technology is just the first step. Getting the universe that we want with all its features is something that they still need to develop out. That is what these technologies enable. And so although we'll get this tech this year, the player experience won't change too much. We'll get more content, but the effects of it won't become apparent until later next year. Next year is likely to become the biggest year ever for Star Citizen, and I will go so far as to say that it will be the year for Star Citizen. Guys, I've been Morphologist. I want to know what you guys think down below. Are you excited for what Chris is talking about here? Are you excited to test persistence and server meshing? And if you guys think that this is a really important technology and it's going to change the game in a big way, maybe you can explain down below how you think persistence is going to change the game for you when it's first released. Anyway, I've been Morphologist. I'll see you in the next one.